Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the show where we try to give you the essential, surprising, and sometimes pretty uncomfortable truths behind the world's biggest brands and ideas.
Yet we take a huge stack of sources. We're talking articles, financial reports, historical documents, and we boil it all down for you.
And today, we are opening up a file on a company that is, it's pretty much global capitalism in a can.
The Coca-Cola Company. It was founded in Atlanta, Georgia, way, way back in 1892, and it has become this multinational machine that's really unlike anything else.
And when you talk about the scale, the numbers almost don't make sense.
Not at all.
The company sells its products in over 200 countries. And if you look at their daily output, they account for something like 1.3 billion beverage servings.
Every single day.
Every single day. That's why we have to do this deep dive.
Our mission today is to look way beyond just the red logo. We really need to trace the company's history, which is, well, it's genuinely bizarre and complex.
It starts as a drug, basically.
It does, and we'll dissect its unique operational model, which is sort of the genius of the whole thing. We'll map out its huge portfolio, and then critically, we have to analyze the big criticisms.
Right, especially around environmental impact and, corporate influence on public health. That stuff really defines its reputation today.
So let's just start with that central tension. This titan of industry, it began as a medicinal tonic, a cure.
It's hilarious and a little unsettling.
Yeah.
But what's maybe less unsettling, especially if you were an early investor, is the financial return.
Oh, the investment stability is the stuff of legend. Our sources note that a single share of Coca-Cola stock, if you bought it back in 1919 for just $40,
$40.
and you just reinvested all the dividends, that one share would have been worth a staggering $9.8 million by 2012.
That's insane.
It's a 10.7% annual return, adjusted for inflation, for almost a century.
That is the very definition of a blue chip stock.
Yeah.
But here's the point, and we're going to keep coming back to this throughout the dive. That immense, sustained financial power, that deep, steady river of cash, is what funds every other part of this company.
Including its ability to defend itself.
Exactly. Defend itself against some really existential criticism.
It's true. The company's wealth gives it this colossal influence, but that success is, it's tied to equally massive responsibilities.
Liabilities.
And liabilities. Just as a preview of the scale here, consider this. The Coca-Cola Company produces over 3 million tons of plastic packaging every year.
Which translates to 110 billion plastic bottles.
110 billion.
They've been labeled the worst plastic polluter in the world, and for good reason. They're churning out 200,000 plastic bottles every single minute.
So you have this company that's built on a kind of a dark origin story, producing world-changing wealth.
Which then funds this machine that is now facing a global environmental reckoning. That contrast, that tension, is what makes this deep dive so vital for you to understand. Okay, let's rewind. Let's go all the way back to 1886 and uncover this foundational story. It sounds less like a business startup and more like a period drama, really.
Yeah, we're calling this part the tonic and the takeover.
It begins with the inventor, right? A pharmacist named John Stith Pemberton from Columbus, Georgia.
And to really get why he invented Coca-Cola, you have to understand the context of his life. It was pretty devastating. Pemberton was severely wounded in the American Civil War.
And like so many men from that era, that injury led to a really severe addiction to morphine.
So the whole genesis of Coca-Cola was explicitly medicinal. He developed it as a patent medicine, a health tonic, that was specifically aimed at controlling his dependency on opioids.
Which sounds kind of crazy now, but it wasn't a totally crackpot idea at the time.
No, it was rooted in this popular, though, devastatingly wrong belief that cocaine could be used as a substitute or even a cure for opioid addiction.
Hence the original formulation. It was a powerhouse of stimulants.
A real powerhouse. It had cocaine from coca leaves and caffeine from cola nuts. Man. And these two ingredients worked together synergistically.
Which is why it was immediately promoted as this healthy tonic, something that would, invigorate you and lift your spirits.
And chemically speaking, it absolutely did.
The name itself was pretty straightforward, but also genius.
Right. Pemberton's bookkeeper, a man named Frank Mason Robinson, gets the credit for that. He chose the name Coca-Cola for the alliteration and the ingredients. And he also created that iconic script logo that we still see everywhere today.
And Robinson was really the marketing mind here. They had very little cash. So he used advertising that just perfectly captured the product's effect.
That famous tagline, Coca-Cola, delicious, refreshing, exhilarating, invigorating.
It wasn't advertised as a fun drink. It was advertised as a boost.
Exactly. Now, unfortunately for Pemberton, he was ill, he was struggling with money, and he started selling off parts of the formula and the brand rights to different people.
But the person who really turned this patent medicine into a commercial empire was Asa Griggs Candler.
Right. Candler saw the potential. He stepped in, and by 1889, he'd managed to buy the full formula and all the brand rights.
For how much?
A mere $2,300.
Now, in today's money, that's more, obviously.
Yeah, our sources say it's about $73,000 in 2024 dollars. But even with that adjustment, it's an absolute historical bargain for what would become one of the most valuable brands on the planet.
So Candler incorporates the Coca-Cola Company in Atlanta in 1892. And he didn't just sell the drink, he sold the idea of the drink.
He was an early marketing pioneer, one of the first businessmen to really go all in on merchandising, calendars, clocks, signs, all sorts of decorative items. He was cementing the brand's visual identity everywhere people looked.
And that strategy, that aggressive marketing, it paid off almost immediately.
Yeah, by 1895, Coca-Cola was being sold all across the U.S. And this relentless expansion just kept going until 1948, when the company claimed an astonishing 60% of the entire American soft drink market.
60%. That's almost a monopoly. But, that figure also tells another story.
A story of vulnerability.
Exactly. Because that 60% share, it dropped sharply. By 1984, it was down to 21.8%.
Which shows that even with brilliant branding, you're not immune to new competitors and changing tastes. That's what led to the infamous Cola Wars.
But despite that market share fight, the company's financial foundation was just rock solid.
It went public in 1919, underwritten by Ernest Woodruff's Trust Company of Georgia.
We mentioned the IPO success earlier, but it's worth saying again just to set the scale.
Right. The bank that underwrote that 1919 offering for only $100,000, huge sum then, but still, they later sold the remaining stake for over $2 billion in 2012.
It's just an almost unparalleled story of corporate value creation in American history.
And you see that value consistently in the stock behavior. The stock, KO on the New York Stock Exchange, is a staple of the Dow Jones and the S&P 500.
And for investors, this is the key. Coca-Cola has paid a dividend every year since 1920.
And as of 2019, they had increased that dividend annually for 57 straight years. That's what institutional reliability looks like.
That is exactly why they call it a blue chip. It's a company that generates cash so reliably that you can literally count on it for over half a century.
So we've covered the chaotic and kind of dark origin story, and we understand the financial success. But none of that really makes sense until you get the engine that runs it all.
Right. So let's shift focus to the structural genius of their business, the syrup and franchising model.
This is the critical insight for you, the listener. Most people think Coke sells bottles of soda.
But that's not really their business, is it? Structurally, they're in the business of selling concentrate and brand protection.
Precisely. The core business model is brilliantly simple. The Coca-Cola Company, the mothership, they largely produce only the syrup concentrate, or they source the bases for other drinks, tea leaves, coffee beans, that sort of thing.
They intentionally avoid most of the expensive, heavy operational work.
They sell that concentrate to a global network of franchise bottlers. And this system goes way back to 1889.
And these bottlers, they hold exclusive contracts for certain geographic areas, and they're the ones who do all the heavy lifting.
Yeah, the franchise bottlers take on all the capital-intensive risk. They're the ones mixing the concentrate with filtered water and sweeteners, packaging the final product.
And then handling the entire infrastructure of selling it, distributing it, and getting it into every single store, restaurant, and vending machine on Earth.
So what's the profound result of this setup? It lets the Coca-Cola Company focus only on the highest margin activities.
Managing the brand identity, executing that massive global ad spend we talked about, and, protecting the secret formula.
They get to shed all the low-margin, capital-intensive work of owning the factories and the trucks and all that.
It's an incredibly elegant, highly profitable model. But since the 80s, they haven't been entirely hands-off.
No, they've actively encouraged and even participated in the consolidation of these bottlers. They often keep a minority share in these huge regional entities, which they call anchor bottlers.
And that gives them a seat at the table, right? They don't have the full financial liability, but they can still influence strategy and maintain quality control through their contracts.
They even formalized this in 2006. They created something called the Bottling Investments Group, or BIG.
And the role of BIG is pretty crucial.
Very. It temporarily takes over bottling operations, uses the company's leadership to invest in them and improve them, and then they often just sell them off again, a process they call refranchising.
So it's like an internal corporate surgery team. They go in, fix the broken parts, streamline everything, and then spin the improved asset back out, keeping a small stake but getting rid of the operational cost.
And it accelerates efficiency across the globe. You can see the result in these huge multinational bottling partners that exist today.
Like Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific Partners, they operate across 29 countries in Europe and Oceania.
And Coke still holds a nearly 20% stake in them.
Or Coca-Cola FEMSA, which serves a huge part of Latin America. The mothership has a 27.8% stake there.
And then there's Coca-Cola HBC, based in Switzerland, which covers 28 countries from Nigeria to Eastern Europe. Coke holds a 23.2% stake in that one.
So this whole complex web of ownership, it ensures control. They don't own all the physical assets, but they direct the flow, and they benefit massively from selling the syrup.
Which brings us back to the power we mentioned in the intro. Let's look at the financial snapshot from 2024. This model, this concentrate model, generated annual revenue of over $47 billion.
And that led to a net income, pure profit, of $10.63 billion.
Think about that. Over $10 billion in profit from selling essentially a flavored water base. And it's all backed by $100 billion in total assets.
And the operational overhead for the main company is pretty lean, considering the scale. They only employ about 69,700 people globally.
And where that money comes from in 2024 is also revealing. North America is still the biggest piece of the pie at 38.7% of sales.
But it's genuinely global. Europe, the Middle East, and Africa are at 16.8%, Latin America at 13.4%, and Asia Pacific at 11.5%.
And if you look at who owns this massive financial engine, it's all about long-term institutional trust. As of March 2025, the top owner is Berkshire Hathaway with 9.3%.
Followed by the Vanguard Group at 8.4% and BlackRock at 5.6%.
So that means the long-term direction of this company is heavily influenced by three of the most powerful investment entities in the world.
And when you combine that guaranteed high-margin revenue with that kind of entrenched ownership, you get a corporate entity with incredible leverage. And we'll see how they use that leverage later on.
Okay, let's shift gears now to the sheer breadth of the business, part 3. From cola to global portfolio. Because even with that financial engine humming, if all you sell is sugary soda, you're eventually going to stall out.
Right. Consumer tastes change, and Coca-Cola had to diversify, and they did it aggressively.
As of 2020, they had something like 500 brands in over 200 countries. But then, responding to the pandemic and the need for efficiency, they strategically announced huge cuts. They got rid of more than half of those brands.
But the need for that diversification was so clear. By 2017, sales of the main Coca-Cola brand were actually down 11%.
People were actively moving away from sugary soft drinks, especially in developed countries. It forced the company to pivot into healthier categories, specialty drinks, things like that.
So to show how adaptable they are, let's look at some of their other big soft drink brands. Some of them have these origin stories that are just, well, pure historical accidents.
The classic example is Fanta. It was introduced around 1941.
And Fanta is basically a World War II story.
It is. A trade embargo against Germany made it impossible for the German office to get the cola syrup concentrate. So Max Keith, the head of the German operation, basically said, we have to create a new product using only what we have available here.
And they created Fanta.
It was pure necessity, but it was a huge hit in wartime Germany. After the war, when the main Coca-Cola Company came back, they realized they had a global winner on their hands, and they just adopted the brand worldwide.
It's a great lesson in corporate resilience.
And then you have Sprite, which came out in 1961. That was their lemon-lime answer to the popularity of 7-Up. It quickly became another global giant.
And for a bit of nostalgia, we should talk about Tab.
Ah, Tab. Introduced in 1963, it was Coke's very first attempt at a diet soft drink. It used saccharin.
And even though it was completely eclipsed by Diet Coke and Coke Zero, they kept selling it until late 2020. Which shows a fascinating kind of loyalty to some of their old brands, even when they weren't selling much.
The company's global reach also forces them into these really specific regional battles. Coca-Cola is the best-selling soft drink in most of the world, but not everywhere.
Right, like in Peru.
Yeah.
The native Inca Cola, which is this bright yellow, very sweet soda, was actually more popular.
So what did Coke do? They executed a strategic move. They bought 50% of the brand's stakes.
So they basically gained control over its marketing and production outside of Peru and secured their access to that market without having to beat the local favorite.
You see a similar thing in Japan, where consumers are way more interested in canned tea and coffee, the Coca-Cola Company's #1 brand in Japan is not a soda.
It's Georgia coffee.
Exactly. It shows they are absolutely willing to change their portfolio to fit local tastes.
And this need to adapt led to a major strategic expansion into so-called healthy beverages starting in the 90s.
Right, they launched Powerade to compete with Gatorade, Minute Maid juices to go, and their bottled water brand, Dasani.
And this strategy relied heavily on acquisitions. They'd already bought Minute Maid way back in 1960.
But more recently, we saw them buy Barks in '95, Odwalla in 2001, though they later discontinued at Fuse Beverage in 2007.
And then the huge one, the $4.1 billion purchase of Glaceau, the company that makes vitamin water, in 2007.
That vitamin water deal really signaled how serious they were about competing in that functional beverage space. They also bought specialty brands like Zico coconut water in 2013 and took full control of Honest Tea in 2011.
They also just kept trying to find that perfect low-calorie formula. Remember C2 Cola in 2004?
Vaguely. It used a blend of corn syrup and artificial sweeteners. It was trying to taste more like classic Coke, but with fewer carbs.
It didn't really work. It was eventually replaced by Coca-Cola Life in 2013. It just highlights this constant, expensive R&D battle to adapt the main product to health trends.
And beyond the beverage aisle, Coke has this bizarre, brief, but very profitable history of non-beverage acquisitions.
The most famous one is their ownership of Columbia Pictures.
A soft drink company owning a Hollywood studio. It sounds like a joke.
It does. They bought it in 1982 for $692 million, partly because the studio was just not worth much at the time, making it an attractive buy.
And during their ownership, the studio released massive hits like Ghostbusters, Stripes, and The Karate Kid.
But after the infamous commercial and critical flop of the movie Ishtar in 1987, the company decided to get out. They sold the studio to Sony for an incredible $3 billion in 1989.
That's almost a fourfold return on an asset totally unrelated to their main business. It was a brilliant financial hedge.
More recently, they've made some calculated moves back into high-margin beverage-adjacent markets.
In 2019, they bought Costa Coffee for £3.9 billion. This gives them a huge international platform in the hot coffee sector, letting them compete directly with Starbucks and expand their non-soda revenue.
We also have to look at their strategy in the energy drink sector. This is interesting. In 2014, Coke bought a 16.7% stake in Monster Beverage for $2.15 billion.
And this wasn't just a simple investment, it was a strategic portfolio trade.
But let's slow down on this because it's a great example of corporate chess. Think of it like swapping trading cards between two powerful players.
Coca-Cola gave ownership of its smaller energy brands, specifically Full Throttle and Burn, over to Monster.
And in return, Monster gave several of its non-energy brands like Hansen's Natural Sodas and Peace Iced Tea to Coke's portfolio.
So it allowed Monster to focus purely on the high-growth energy market, and it allowed Coke to absorb these successful, established natural and tea brands without having to compete. A mutually beneficial deal.
And finally, a clear sign of just pure market pragmatism. Alcohol.
In 2021, the company debuted a range of alcoholic hard seltzers under its Mexican sparkling water brand, Topo Chico, launching them in the UK and the US.
It just showed that no category is really off limits if the market demand and the profit margins are there.
We should also mention the major strategic deal that didn't happen.
Oh, right, China.
In 2009, China's Ministry of Commerce flat out blocked Coke's $2.4 billion bid for Huayuan Juice Group.
The official reason was that the deal would create a virtual monopoly in the Chinese juice market, and it would hurt smaller local companies.
But our sources also cite nationalism as a heavy factor. It highlights the sensitivity around foreign companies controlling key local consumer brands in a massive market like China. Okay, so let's pivot now to part 4. Advertising, sponsorship, and influence. If the syrup and franchise model is the engine that generates the cash,
then this part is how that cash gets spent to maintain global dominance and shape cultural trends.
Coca-Cola advertising is rightly described as among the most prolific in marketing history. It has a huge cultural footprint, and it costs billions to maintain.
We're talking about an annual global spend of around $4 billion. It was $4.24 billion in 2019 alone.
And they use every possible method to reach you. That budget is spread across direct marketing, massive social media campaigns. They report 86 million global fan engagements, and especially mobile advertising.
Every delivery truck is a mobile billboard. Every red cooler, every vending machine, it just reinforces the brand right at the point of sale.
That massive marketing budget also pays for protecting its secrets. Which brings us to a really remarkable story from 2006.
Right, the trade secrets and security incident.
This was a major corporate espionage attempt. A Coca-Cola employee and two other people were arrested for trying to sell proprietary trade secrets to their arch-rival, PepsiCo, for $1.5 million.
And this was for a new beverage in development, not the original famous formula.
Right. But here's the interesting part. PepsiCo actually showed some unexpected corporate ethics here.
When the conspirators came to them, PepsiCo immediately called the FBI.
It was PepsiCo that helped expose the whole thing, which is a rare moment of corporate cooperation against criminal activity.
So beyond defense, their most powerful tool is their use of global sponsorships, sports, entertainment. They make sure the brand is always associated with positive mass-market events.
Their sports portfolio is just immense. They have title sponsorships in NASCAR. They're a key partner for the NCAA, the Olympic Games, and the FIFA World Cup.
At the World Cup, they've even partnered with Panini for the virtual sticker album for every tournament since 2006.
They're deeply involved in golf, sponsoring the PGA Tour's season-ending Tour Championship. They sponsor the McLaren Formula One team. They've even gotten into esports with NASCAR.
And they recently shifted their allegiance in Major League Baseball. In 2017, they signed a multi-year deal to become the official soft drink, kicking Pepsi out.
And today, you'll find Coke products in 19 MLB ballparks. They just added the Chicago Cubs and Milwaukee Brewers in 2023.
Their presence in theme parks is almost a monopoly. They sponsor and exclusively supply beverages to 6 of the 9 largest global theme park operators.
That includes Disney Experiences, Universal, Six Flags, and Cedar Fair.
The only really big, high-profile exception to that is the Shanghai Disney Resort, which serves Pepsi, a fascinating little anomaly in their global network.
Their history in television also ties into these huge cultural moments. They sponsored Walt Disney's very first TV show back in 1950.
They sponsored the holiday classic A Charlie Brown Christmas in 1965. And they were the main sponsor for the TV behemoth American Idol from 2002 to 2014.
Another key cultural property they developed is the Coke Studio franchise. It started in Brazil and has adapted into these massive regional cultural successes all over the world.
Right, like Coke Studio Pakistan, Coke Studio India, and Coke Studio Africa.
And finally, we have to look at their civic and political involvement. This is where the company's influence leaves the world of entertainment and enters social history and power dynamics.
And the most iconic example of this involves the Civil Rights era.
In 1964, Atlanta was still a segregated city. When Martin Luther King Jr. won the Nobel Peace Prize, the local business leaders refused to support an interracial celebratory dinner for him.
And this is where corporate leverage came into play. J. Paul Austin, who was the chairman and CEO of Coca-Cola at the time, called a meeting with the business elite and the mayor.
And the message he delivered, as it's been chronicled by Andrew Young, was basically an ultimatum.
He said something powerful. It is embarrassing for Coca-Cola to be located in a city that refuses to honor its Nobel Prize winner. We're an international business. The Coca-Cola Company does not need Atlanta. You all need to decide whether Atlanta needs the Coca-Cola Company.
And the outcome. Within 2 hours, every single ticket to that dinner was sold.
It's an incredible anecdote. It just reveals the immense power a global, cash-rich corporation can have over the social policy of its hometown.
But that influence isn't always directed towards social progress. In 2012, Coca-Cola contributed $1,600,500 to a campaign opposing Proposition 37 in California.
And that proposition would have mandated the labeling of foods containing GMOs, genetically modified ingredients.
They have also engaged in positive global campaigns. They were listed as a partner in 2012 of the RED campaign, which works to prevent the transmission of HIV from mother to child.
And in the current American political climate, they maintain their tradition of broad engagement. In 2024, Coca-Cola sponsored the presidential campaign of Donald J. Trump and even gifted him a custom Coke bottle for his inauguration.
So this willingness to engage politically on all sides just underscores their commitment to securing a favorable business environment, no matter who's in charge.
That remarkable ability to generate cash and exert political influence brings us to the inevitable friction point in this deep dive. Let's pivot now to the immense scrutiny that follows a company this size. Part 5. The weight of the world criticism and corporate responsibility.
When you're making tens of billions in revenue from selling syrup, you have the resources to defend yourself against any threat. And the biggest threat over the past couple of decades has been the growing scientific consensus on the harmful health effects of sugary drinks.
And Coca-Cola's response was sophisticated. They used a strategy that critics call front groups.
Basically, funding what seemed to be independent organizations to deflect public attention away from the link between their products and diseases like type 2 diabetes.
One early example was the Beverage Institute for Health and Wellness.
What made this problematic was that it was led by a woman who was simultaneously the Coca-Cola Company's chief science and health officer.
So this institute sponsored continuing education for dietitians and nurses. And critics argue this created a huge conflict of interest, potentially influencing their public health stances on sugary drinks.
But the most egregious example was the Global Energy Balance Network, or GEBN. This group was explicitly funded by Coke to shift the public narrative away from diet and toward lack of exercise as the main cause of obesity.
But investigative reports eventually exposed them. They found that GBN was designing studies to arrive at conclusions that were predetermined by the company, and they were cherry-picking data to support Coke's PR agenda.
After it was exposed in August 2015, the GBN was shut down very quickly.
But the pattern continued. 3 years later, Coke was found to be funding an initiative in China called Happy 10 Minutes.
And this was through the International Life Sciences Institute, or ILSI, a group that had previously promoted the tobacco industry's agenda back in the 80s and 90s.
The goal of Happy 10 Minutes was pretty clear. Promote physical activity to the Chinese population while completely avoiding any discussion of the link between sugary drinks and diet-related diseases.
It's a classic tactic. You focus on one side of the energy balance equation to protect your core product.
Okay, let's shift now to environmental impact. And let's start with plastic and waste. This is maybe the most visible and pressing crisis facing the company today.
The production numbers, again, are just overwhelming. Coca-Cola produces over 3 million tons of plastic packaging every single year,
which translates to 110 billion single-use plastic bottles.
And the sheer volume is why the company has repeatedly been labeled the worst plastic polluter in the world. Forbes magazine called it the world's most polluting brand, noting their output of 200,000 plastic bottles per minute.
And our sources cite real-world consequences, like in Samoa, where residents reported this massive spike in plastic pollution right after Coca-Cola switched from using reusable glass bottles to single-use plastic.
And compounding the problem is the company's own stance. In 2019, their global chief executive stated very plainly that Coca-Cola had no plans to reduce its use of plastic bottles, because they claim consumers overwhelmingly prefer lightweight, resealable plastic. They also actively oppose mandatory bottle bill legislation that's designed to encourage recycling.
And despite their public pledges, their sustainability goals are not going well.
No. In 2018, Coke pledged to recycle the equivalent of 100% of its packaging by 2030. But by December 2024, the company announced they were going to fail to meet that initial goal.
And the composition of your packaging really shows the problem. In 2023, almost half, 47.7%, was plastic. Only 26% aluminum and 10.4% glass.
And crucially, the sources note that only 1.2% of their packaging was reusable, and their use of virgin plastics has actually increased by about 6% since 2019.
The long-term environmental damage is projected to be huge. A 2025 study estimated that Coke, along with PepsiCo and Nestle, collectively contributed between 14 and 21 million tons of plastic waste into aquatic environments between 2000 and 2023.
And it goes beyond plastic. We have to address their water usage and depletion.
Right. Because of the decentralized bottling model, the mothership focuses on syrup. But the franchise bottlers are accused of depleting vital local water sources all over the world.
Our sources highlight a really stark case in Caldera, Rajasthan, in India. Local government data showed that water levels were stable there until the Coca-Cola plant opened in 2000.
And in the 5 years after that, water levels dropped by almost 10 meters.
It devastated local harvests and dried up local wells. It's a direct connection between industrial use and local environmental impact.
We also have to touch on the energy use, which is linked to their choice of sweetener.
Right. While they use cane sugar in some parts of the world, their reliance on high fructose corn syrup in North America and other places is documented as being less sustainable.
Why is that?
Because the manufacturing process for corn syrup is very carbon intensive. It requires a lot of fossil fuels for the conversion process, but also for the heavy machinery, the irrigation, and the fertilization you need to grow that much corn. It's a systemic energy burden built right into the recipe.
And finally, we have to turn to the company's long and troubled history with racial discrimination allegations.
In November of 2000, Coca-Cola agreed to pay a massive $192.5 million to settle a class action lawsuit that alleged racial discrimination.
And that settlement also mandated fundamental changes to their management, promotion, and how they treated minority employees in the U.S.
But even after that nearly $200 million settlement, the problems didn't just go away. Protesters at their 2003 annual meeting claimed that Black people were still underrepresented in management, paid less, and fired more often.
However, the court-mandated changes did eventually force some progress. By 2004, a diversity rating organization noted that because of the pressure from the settlement, Coke had implemented management practices that actually put them in the top 10 for diversity efforts.
But despite those improvements, the litigation just kept coming, which suggests the problem was systemic and cultural. In 2012, 16 workers of color sued the company again, alleging they were still working in a cesspool of racial discrimination.
And as a final example, just showing how fraught this has become, in 2021, an employee training course instructed employees to be less white.
The course materials equated whiteness with being arrogant and oppressive, and it led to significant public backlash.
So what does this all mean when you put the whole picture together? We've traced the Coca-Cola Company from this tiny dose of medicine made by a morphine-addicted pharmacist through brilliant marketing to an absolutely dominant financial machine.
The central story of this deep dive is really the tension between a brilliant, profitable strategy and a massive, complex global consequence.
It's a company that became a global icon through the genius of franchising and branding, only to find itself facing intense scrutiny over its environmental output, its influence on public health, and systemic issues in its workplace.
And when we connect the dots for you, the learner, the formula for their power becomes crystal clear. The staggering financial success of Coca-Cola, which comes from focusing only on that high-margin concentrate and selling off the bottling risk.
That generates a massive global war chest.
And this war chest is what funds their ability to spend $4 billion a year on advertising, to exert political leverage, like that ultimatum in Atlanta in 1964, and to finance these sophisticated networks and front groups designed to defend their product against scientific criticism.
The business model directly funds the corporate defense strategy.
Exactly.
So we're left with this final thought for you to mull over. Given that the Coca-Cola Company has demonstrated this immense power, the power to intervene in major moments of civil rights history, the power to influence global health discourse, the logistical capability to deliver billions of servings a day, what are the inherent responsibilities of a single brand whose packaging and product are, arguably, the most ubiquitous consumer goods on Earth?
What does it really mean when a company says they need the world to sell their product, when the data clearly shows that the world, especially our oceans and our local water sources, is struggling under the weight of the sheer scale, the volume, and the influential political maneuvering of that same company? It really demands that we, as consumers, look beyond the red logo and scrutinize the machine that's working underneath.